Wow, okay, I'm sure nobody expected South Park's Season 27 premiere to blow up quite as much as it did, getting a very vocalized response from the President of the United States. I wonder why. So last time I updated you guys about the recent goings-on with South Park's streaming troubles, a lot has happened. Most notably, it's over. Obviously, the lawsuits will most likely continue for another while, but at this point at the very least, we're getting new South Park episodes as they go on in the background. It wasn't cheap to get it back, however, as Paramount has now ended their talks with Warner Brothers for the streaming rights to the show in favor of putting it back on Paramount Plus definitively, which has caused three things to happen. 1. Matt Stone and Trey Parker are now billionaires after selling these rights for $1.5 billion, meaning each episode of South Park for the next 5 seasons is worth a whopping $30 million. That cannot be economic, right? 2. It's pretty much given Paramount no reason to continue with the special events they've been forcing for the past few years. But number 3, it's allowed South Park Season 27 to finally premiere, where now Matt and Trey are at threat of being at the center of another lawsuit. Hooray! Pretty bold, I must admit. Start your new season off by aiming your sights directly at the most powerful man in the country at the minute. But hey, I'm sure at this point they just have such a fuck-it attitude towards anything they're making, and I respect it. But this episode has probably become the most talked about South Park episode in ages. Not that previous seasons haven't had their one or two controversies or time in the spotlight, like when they shat on Lizzo in their last special. But this time especially, it really comes off like Matt and Trey's way of saying they are not holding back this time. This one is easily their most controversial in a long time. You know, when they'd make fun of Harry and Meghan, it was pretty clear that they were unreasonable in their actions. There weren't many people defending them in that instance. However, here there are way more people, first of all, praising South Park for making such a brave re-entrance, putting a metaphorical target on their heads for the foreseeable future, but more importantly, haters and now ex-fans coming out to rant about the show not being good for decades. That this episode was actually incredibly lazy, and only chose to make bottom-of-the-barrel jokes that have been beaten to death years ago. As well as showcasing Matt and Trey as hypocrites, them being called out for not making potshots towards previous, similar figures on the same scale as this premiere does. And that's because of one thing and one thing only, the topic that frequently gets South Park into trouble. Scratch that, the topic that always gets everyone into trouble. Politics. That's always going to be the issue here. Talk about politics in any form and there will always be at least 50% of people out there who hate your guts for it. But this South Park episode is so quickly spread around. So much so that it's called for a response from the goddamn White House, resulting in something we've never seen in the history of the series. The president vocally calling out South Park, or at least, you know, the White House on his behalf. I mean, I can't remember the last time this has happened since, like, The Simpsons in the early 90s.
To make American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons.
So if for some reason you haven't seen the Season 27 premiere of South Park, I'll give you a quick rundown before swiftly moving on to the aftermath, because believe you me, there are a lot of different angles to discuss. And by that, I mean 3. Season 27's Sermon on the Mount focuses on 3 or so different stories all revolving around the same overall theme of the times we're currently living in, politically at least, and how much the discussion around wokeness has changed since Donald Trump won the most recent presidential election. In particular, we see Eric upset that his favorite liberal show has been cancelled after the Trump administration cut their federal funding. It's here Cartman has finally come to realize that woke is officially dead. You can say and do whatever you want now that Trump is president. A sizable aspect of his campaign being to criticize the wokeness brought on by the Biden administration. However, instead of Cartman having the reaction some would expect, being ecstatic to learn he can say or do whatever he wants, he's actually depressed at the idea, because now that anybody can be offensive, it's taken all the fun out of it for him. There's definitely something to say about this being a stand-in for Matt and Trey's own attitudes. South Park is obviously known for pushing a lot of buttons, and so they're clearly reflecting on their own place in all of this.
Oh, well that's not good. No, it's terrible. 'Cause now I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Ironically, I think this attitude is quite similar to what Family Guy had to say in relation to Trump during his first presidency.
We're a cartoon. You can turn us off. You're the president. We can't turn you off. And you're on, like, all the time.
However, whereas that episode put such a fourth wall breaking focus on it to the point of being obnoxious, I'm glad South Park instead chose to play it here for laughs. The entire second half of the story having Cartman decide he just needs to kill himself, along with Butters. Family Guy's case of this is also much worse in that it tries too hard to defend itself to the world on a point nobody was making, whereas South Park instead chose to tackle it from a more internal point of view, using this to ask the question, what's the point in being offensive when being offensive is the norm? The other plot throughout the episode deals with Donald Trump directly, with him being betrayed with the Canadian flappy mouth thing South Park had only ever done with one other real person's face: Saddam Hussein. They are not very subtle in pointing out the parallels, pretty much calling Trump a fascist dictator from the start. Although unlike Saddam, who was trapped in hell, we instead watch as Trump parades around the White House acting like everything is great now, while threatening to sue anybody who suggests otherwise. This is based off real events. Surprisingly, not only has he had history of trying to sue Saturday Night Live for what he called biased coverage, but more recently, just this month as a matter of fact, Paramount were forced to pay Trump $16 million for an interview they had done with Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes, a moment which is referenced in the episode.
The townspeople claim that the president, who is a great man.
A great man.
Great guy. We know he's probably watching, and,
I want to talk more about this in a bit when discussing their reaction to the episode and how a lot of people argued Matt and Trey were hypocritical for the portrayal of the president. But the gist of it is, like a lot of South Park's most famous roasts, there's nothing really all that poignant being said here. They aren't attempting to make any kind of statement that goes beyond Trump is a baby who threatens to sue people who make fun of him, and also has a tiny pee-pee. The final point the episode makes is directed towards every side of this: Trump, Paramount, and themselves. As Trump threatens to sue South Park, bankrupting the town, Jesus comes down to share his words of wisdom.
I didn't want to come back and be in the school, but I had to because it was part of a lawsuit and the agreement with Paramount.
Basically, it's a commentary poking fun at the aftermath for this Paramount Skydance merger, something I talked about in my last South Park video. See, now that Paramount has a new CEO, the president of Skydance, it means new decisions are going to start being made. One of those most recent decisions being to cancel The Late Show with Stephen Colbert on CBS. Owned by Paramount. The show was cancelled citing financial pressures, but there's a lot of speculation out there that this was also caused by pressures from the Trump administration, with Stephen Colbert being one of the largest figures who regularly shits on him. I'm not even gonna pretend to know anything about this fucking junk. All I know is this whole ordeal somehow brought back our cartoon president for a brief moment, and for that I hate it. But basically, Jesus is telling the town to get a grip and realize what's going on here. They just get completely meta at this point. They do not leave anything up for interpretation. He reminds them of what's happened to Colbert now that Paramount has a new president, and why should they think they're any different? It's the goddamn president, and here they are playing with fire. Now, do I think Paramount will actually ever cancel South Park? No fucking way, they just spent $1.5 billion on that thing. What a colossal waste of money that would be. But I think it's probably the funniest part of the episode, just dropping the act at the very last minute and acknowledging what everybody has been thinking. And it really tied together Jesus' involvement here, as I thought he was easily the most underutilized aspect of the episode, especially since the rest of it felt quite familiar in terms of what South Park had covered in the past. That's what kind of stops me from loving this episode, if I'm being honest. At least not as much as everyone else did. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it a lot and thought it was a great premiere, but generally it felt like everything it had to say was a slight rehash of something they had already done to better effect in the past. Commenting on wokeness being dead and being unsure of their place in it all reminded me a lot of Raising the Bar. The town being at threat of bankruptcy had been done a couple times. And the whole joke of the villain deciding to simply sue everyone as their only defense brought back memories of Trapped in the Closet.
Scientology is just a big fat global scam.
Oh, we are gonna sue you!
Not that any of this makes the episode bad or whatever, but I couldn't help but feel like it was a series of older plot points stitched together in a new way. I wonder how it'll hold up down the line. It's definitely one of those cases where the response to the episode has been the funniest thing about it. So in regards to the response to the episode, there's three main sides to tackle this from. The people who liked it, the people who didn't, and the White House. Let's start there, as they easily had the least interesting response beyond the fact that it's the fucking president responding to a cartoon. But basically the response boils down to, lol, you're irrelevant. Probably not the best comeback less than a week after they were paid $1 billion for the show. Just like the creators of South Park, the left has no authentic or original content. Which is why their popularity continues to reach record lows. Wow. I want to focus on this part though. The left's hypocrisy truly has no end. For years they have come after South Park for what they labeled as offense content, whatever that means. But suddenly they are praising the show? Which takes us to our next group, the folks who liked the episode. So let's start by making one thing perfectly clear. Not everyone who likes South Park is a right-wing nutjob, and not everyone who hates South Park is some sensitive liberal snowflake. It's one of the most popular shows in history. They have millions of fans out there who believe millions of different things. However, saying that, you can't deny that on the outside, South Park has built a reputation for being enjoyed by conservatives and hated by liberals. No matter how untrue that statement evidently is. Really, that's the only response you can give to this. Sure, South Park has done many controversial episodes in the past. The infamous trans sports one immediately comes to mind. And sure, there are billions of liberals out there who very much hate South Park. But not only does that not hold much weight when considering how much it relies on grouping liberals as a single entity with no independent thought, but it also can be said in the exact opposite way, that there are now many Republicans who once praised South Park who have since turned on it after the episode. Do you know how often that "Minorities at My Water Park" song or the clip of Cartman using the girl's bathroom gets shared over Twitter by people completely glossing over the fact that you are not meant to think Cartman is in the right for either of these? And now do you know how much I get to see that new norm shit in my timeline? The show that directly endorses Trump and Elon Musk and was also calling itself the South Park of X. There were evidently a lot of folks out there who must have assumed the show would take a more conservative stance on Trump. I guess these people just so happened to also miss the season's worth of South Park episodes shitting on Trump. Breaking news, South Park is making fun of Donald Trump. Again. Like, why is this blowing up this time? This doesn't apply to everyone, of course. Just like I'm sure there are Republicans who hated the episode, I'm sure there were Republicans who enjoyed it, or liberals that hated it. That's not to even mention the people on either side who just thought it wasn't funny or wanted a less politically fueled premiere. It's funny how South Park has built up their reputation as providing this really biting social commentary, when most all the fanbase care about is whether or not they get to see Stan and Kyle talking to each other in the background for a split second. And so if you were upset they chose to spend their premiere lambasting Trump, something they said they were done with like a decade ago, then I'd say you're valid in that. You just can't really work on this logic of lumping everyone together. What do I know, though? This is where the notion that Matt and Trey are hypocrites came from. The fact that they're so vicious to Trump while not giving nearly as much attention to liberal presidents from years back, most notably Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden. This is such a dumb and easily disprovable argument, so I don't want to give it too much attention, but basically, they made plenty of jokes about Obama. They have him proclaim he's spending his last day on Earth watching a Medea movie. It's just that Obama didn't attack people as blatantly as Trump does, and so I'm sure Matt and Trey are simply trying to match what he gives out on a regular basis. They depict Hillary Clinton like this, and have made plenty of jabs at her too. And South Park was pretty busy the entire Biden administration, doing a series of 45-minute long specials, which I'm sure they wouldn't want to dedicate to shitting on the president. As well as it being most likely that Biden simply didn't do anything all that notable at the time of them making regular episodes. At least nothing they could think of a good enough story for. But really, the true reason South Park went after Trump so hard was for one very clear reason. A reason which was not disguised at all throughout the episode, and it's also a theme that's recurred throughout South Park's entire history. Censorship. Since its first season, South Park had been covering storylines to do with censorship. Hell, it's what the entire first movie's about. They made it clear their stance on the subject, being very open as to how they think, that being, either all of it's okay or none of it is. South Park has dealt with many groups of people attempting to censor them over the past decades, whether it be Comedy Central wanting them to avoid certain topics altogether, or extremist terrorist groups threatening their lives for showing a depiction of Muhammad. Matt and Trey have made it evident that they will not hold back on anything they say, feeling as if censorship is an incredibly dangerous thing, especially when it comes to comedy. They made an entire episode making fun of Tom Cruise for something incredibly juvenile. Tom Cruise threatens to screw over Paramount if they don't pull the episode. It gets pulled, and so what happens? They make him the main villain for his own two-part special. Of course they went after Trump. He stands for everything they're against. This isn't Matt or Trey succumbing to pressure, or a bribe, or turning woke, God forbid. It's them saying the thing they've said since day one. If you try to sue someone because they make fun of you, then you're a loser. You know what this whole situation reminds me of? A story called When This Exact Same Thing Happened 2 years ago. Worldwide Privacy Tour satirized Prince Harry and his wife Meghan 1 season ago. This episode also makes a very simple observation. Isn't it kind of funny how Harry and Meghan are doing a press tour about how they want privacy? They supposedly threatened legal action. While this was later denied, them claiming they outright refused to watch the show while also calling it boring, which sends a conflicting message. I similarly saw this episode talked about all over social media, along with their supposed reaction, and it's all because they couldn't just take the joke. It's also not a particularly strong episode in my opinion. It's quite unmemorable as a matter of fact. But you want to know what I will never forget? The fact that Harry and Meghan publicly came out to cry about the episode and do nothing but prove its point tenfold. I'm then reminded of 2 South Park specials. The very last 2 South Park specials, as a matter of fact. Not Suitable for Children and The End of Obesity. Each of these episodes were talked about for 2 main reasons. Making fun of Logan Paul and making fun of Lizzo. What do you know? Also 2 episodes making very simple observations. Boy, Logan Paul sure does put on a weird alpha male persona in an effort to sell stuff to children. Lizzo makes people feel good about their weight because she's fat. When these specials aired, it was all over the internet. People making fun of both of them relentlessly to the point where they both responded. But not with a defense. Instead, they both embraced their parody. Logan Paul recreated the commercial scene in the episode, and Lizzo dressed up in this Ozempic costume for Halloween with an inflatable Eric Cartman. And because of this, there were 2 main responses. Wow, what good sports! And damn, well, it's not funny anymore if they're in on it. They killed the jokes then and there by not taking themselves so seriously, a trait not shared with some of South Park's most famous celebrity roasts. If there's one thing Matt and Trey hate more than censorship, it's people who take themselves more seriously than they should. So I say again, why wouldn't they go after Trump? It was like the most obvious thing ever, an episode that wouldn't have blown up nearly as much as it did if people didn't get so up in arms about it, especially a side most commonly associated with making fun of those who are sensitive to jokes. Because at the end of the day, the funny part of this episode is not that they showed Trump with a tiny dick, it's that he got mad about it.